Good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show, coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is May the 19th, the 139th day of the year, and only 226 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll be doing it again. It's National Devil's Food Cake Day, Malcolm X Day, National Menger Day. On this particular day, you're supposed to go outside, have a picnic, bring out the shorts, usher in the warm days of May. Hepatitis Testing Day. Celebrate your elected officials day as if there's anything to celebrate. Plant Something Day, World Family Doctor Day, World Inflammatory Bowel Disease Day, Victoria Day. Supposed to courtesy for the reigning Queen of Style and Grace, Queen Victoria. Supply Chain Professionals Day, International Heritage Breeds Week, Cannes Film Festival. It ends on the 24th, which is Saturday. Be Nice to Nettles Week and Dementia Action Week. All right, I took care of our holidays observances. Let's look at what's in the news. Medical experts are taken back that Biden's cancer is so far advanced as prostate cancer. The 7 fugitives broke out of New Orleans, Louisiana jail. There were 10 that broke out, 3 have been captured. They decided it was an inside job. Well, Iran has given an unshakable vow regarding its nuclear program. They say the nuclear enrichment will continue with or without a deal. They are thumbing their nose at the rest of the world. The new DA in LA County, Nathan Hochman, promises a crackdown on illegal immigrants. The fun is over, he says. The law is the law. Well, Trump's big, beautiful tax and spending bill has cleared a major hurdle in the House. We actually might see something from it. The FBS Patel and Bongino have shut down the Epstein conspiracy theories. They insist he killed himself, that nobody murdered him. Well, weight loss medication may have other benefits. Semaglutide and liraglutide found to reduce alcohol use among drinkers, which of course is a good thing. All right, what has happened here? There we go. Country music, Alan Jackson, country music star, retires from touring after 30 years on the road. Diddy, our former DOJ expert, trying to save his assets from government seizure. His $40 million LA mansion, Miami properties, Backbone records can all be forfeited. He's trying to hang on to something. Now, the Coast Guard has weighed in on Schumer's claim that Doge contributed to the Brooklyn Bridge crash when the Mexican Navy ship lost its power before the collision with the bridge. 2 crew members were killed and 19 others were injured. And Schumer says it's all Trump's fault. He made that claim in a press conference Sunday, saying that he'd been briefed on the details of the crash, which left 2 people dead. Argued that the Coast Guard system may have been operating at partial capacity due to a Doge hiring freeze. And of course, I don't know what they're going to blame everything on after Trump is out of office, but For right now, anything that happens negative is Trump's fault. I think it's time Schumer retired. He's been around much too long. Officials suspect the breakout, as I said, in New Orleans was a inside job. Somebody helped them break out. California families suing the funeral home after finding the wrong body's been placed in their uncle's casket. Mortuary staff now didn't accept telling the family they were mistaken about their own relative, but they insist it's not their relative in the casket. The business owners in Los Angeles blast a baby shark on a loop to try to do away with the homeless encampment. I would have to say to me that particular song would have me moving my tent. Kentucky ex-sheriff's frivolous insanity claim won't fly on a judge's suspected murder, according to prosecutors. Sean Mickey Steins is accused of murdering Kentucky judge Kevin Mullins, and he's pleading under President Biden. The left had a field day. That's not going on now under President Trump. Well, I've been reading a lot of material about the rich and the famous who come in contact with UFOs. And one who name jumped out of the material was Jackie Gleason. Now, according to what I read, Timothy Green Beckley got a letter from Jackie Gleason Productions, ordered a copy of a mimeograph book he'd written called UFOs Around the World. And there's long been a story that Gleason was personally involved in researching UFOs. Supposedly, he had one of the largest UFO and metaphysical libraries in private hands, thousands of volumes. Now, according to the story, in the 1950s, Gleason was still doing his network TV show out of New York. He'd frequently drop into the studios with Long John Neville, who was on WR radio, and they'd sit around an open mic all night and exchange words with the experts in the UFO field. And Gleason would often use harsh language to put to rest those fanciful details about trips aboard UFOs to other planets that he personally didn't buy. And while he wasn't a believer in the stories told by folks such as George Adamski and others, he didn't dispute the fact that something strange was in fact going on regarding unexplained things seen in the sky. It seems Gleason had sighted UFOs on at least 2 occasions that he's willing to admit. Those sightings took place near Miami and convinced Gleason that these were definitely not objects made on our planet. They weren't secret weapons, but they were in fact solid craft. And he said on both occasions UFOs reflected the rays of the sun low enough for him to determine they couldn't be explained by ordinary means. So, 2 sightings. Now, I know people who claim to have seen far more than 2. Well, there was a story circulated by Gleason's ex-wife. Said he had actually viewed the bodies of several aliens who died when their craft crashed in the Southwest. The story came out of the National Enquirer. Though Beverly Gleason later confirmed it to members of the press, independent confirmation of Gleason's experience couldn't be obtained. Now, there was a young man who knew Gleason personally, and he said the event did take place. It was Larry Warren, airman first class, stationed at Bentwaters Air Force Base in England. And over Christmas week in 1980, there were some unusual events that took place. There was a UFO picked up on radar and tracked down just outside the perimeter of the base. On the first of several nights of confrontation with the bizarre, 3 security policemen ventured into the area and came across an eerie-looking object hovering just above the ground. One of the MPs said he was mesmerized, unable to move for nearly an hour. And while this went on, he said he received a telepathic message that the craft would in fact return. Over the next few nights, up to 80 U.S. servicemen, British police, as well as civilians at a nearby farm, witnessed an historic event. According to Larry Warren, who stood within a few feet of this craft, 3 occupants came out of the ship and communicated with a high-ranking member of the U.S. Air Force. Now, the close encounters at Bentwaters became the subject of several books. Jenny Randall wrote one called From Out of the Blue, and it was given a lot of publicity on CNN, home box office, and Unsolved Mysteries. And Warren became somewhat of a celebrity himself as he remained in the public eye, willing to talk about what he'd seen. He's even been at odds with other members of the Bentwaters Observation Party who changed their stories, denied for a time that Warren was even stationed at the base. And in fact, he was the original whistleblower who ignited the firestorm by revealing what had happened over a period of 3 days. Well, the Bentwaters incident wasn't the main crux of this story, but only served as a form of, I guess you could say, validation. According to Warren, who appeared on George Norrie's Coast to Coast, Jackie Gleason was interested in hearing his story firsthand. May of 1986, Warren was living in Connecticut, and both CNN and HBO had run pieces on the Bentwaters case. And through mutual members of his family, he was told that Gleason would like to talk to him privately at his home in Westchester County, so a meeting was set up. And 3 million listeners, give or take, across North America, listening to the story. I mean, let's face it, Coast to Coast has had a large listening audience for many years. I've been on it several times. After being introduced to Gleason, the 2 men went into Gleason's recreation room. There were hundreds of UFO books all over the place. But Gleason told him that was only a tiny portion of his collection, which was housed in his home in Florida. It wasn't until after Warren had been down to a few beers and Gleason had had a number of drinks, Rob Roy's, which was his favorite drink, that the conversation really got down to what you might say were brass tacks. Well, at some point, Gleason said, I want to tell you something very amazing, probably come out someday anyway. We've got them. Aliens. According to Warren, Jackie proceeded to tell him that the circumstances led to him to the stunning conclusion extraterrestrials have arrived here. He said it was back when Nixon was in office, something amazing happened. We were golfing buddies and been out on the course all day. When somewhere around the 15th hole, the subject of UFOs came up. Well, not many people knew it, but Nixon shared Gleason's interest in this matter, and he had a large collection of UFO books in his own house. For some reason, it really took him into his confidence about what he personally knew to be true. One of the reasons Gleason believes that he was usually surrounded by aides and advisors. Well, late one night, matters changed radically when Nixon showed up at Gleason's house about midnight. No Secret Service agents. He was alone. And Gleason asked him what he was doing there, and he said he wanted to take him someplace and show him something. Well, Gleason got into Nixon's private car, and they went to Homestead Air Force Base. And Gleason said they got to the gate. The young MP came up to the car and looked inside, and when he saw who was behind the wheel, I mean, his mouth just fell open. He just sort of pointed, and they drove in. Well, Gleason later found out Secret Service was going crazy trying to find out where Nixon was at. And Gleason said we drove to the very far end of the base in a segregated area, finally stopping near a well-guarded building. Security police saw him and moved back as they passed and went into the structure. He said there were a number of labs they passed through before they got to a section where Nixon pointed out what he said was the wreckage of a flying saucer, enclosed in several large cases. Now, Gleason said he initially thought this whole thing was a joke, based on their earlier conversations at the golf course, but it wasn't. As Gleason soon found out, they went into an inner chamber, and there were 6 or 8 what looked like glass-top coat freezers. And inside them were the mangled remains of what Gleason initially thought were children. But when he made a closer examination, he saw that some of the figures looked quite old, and most were mangled as if they'd been in an accident. According to what Larry Warren said, Gleason said, all in all, it was a very pathetic sight. At one point, the president had tears in his eyes, and finally Gleason realized this wasn't his way of trying to be humorous. Warren said to pin down Gleason for additional information as to how the military managed to obtain the wreckage and the corpses took a little bit of doing. He wanted possibly from the crash of the disc near Roswell. And Gleason could only shake his head and said he didn't know for sure, since Nixon really didn't fill him in on too many details surrounding this weird display. But he did give a little bit more information about the creatures themselves. He said they were very small, they're more than 3 feet tall, grayish-colored skin and slanted eyes that were deeply set, and had 3 or 4 fingers on each hand, but they were definitely not human. Of that he was absolutely certain. Well, for 3 weeks following his trip with Nixon to Homestead Air Force Base, Gleason said he couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, and he told Warren he was very traumatized by all this. He just couldn't understand where our government wouldn't tell the public all they knew about UFOs. He said he even drank more heavily than usual until he could regain his composure and come back down to everyday reality. And Warren said he was pretty sure that Gleason wasn't lying to him. He said you could tell he was sincere and took the whole affair very serious. Wanted to get it off his chest, and that's why he was telling Warren about it. Well, as far as Warren was concerned, Gleason's personal testimony only added extra credibility to his own first-hand experience with aliens while he was in the military. And he said Gleason felt like he did. The government needed to come clean and tell everybody what they knew about the aliens. It's time they stopped lying to the public, or at least all the evidence they have. And Gleason was really into UFOs. In fact, he had a UFO-shaped cottage on his property referred to as the spaceship. Well, the end of the coast-to-coast interview with Warren led to him being invited back on the show by Nori. And Warren said, well, it's only taken me 35 years to be invited on this time, referring to the fact that everybody else involved in the Gut Waters has been in front of the coast microphones numerous times. Well, there's been a lot of names associated with UFOs. One of them was an individual named Branton. And his real name was Bruce Allen Walton. Everybody referred to him as Branton. And apparently he did it out of fear for his life. Now he had, according to the story, learned certain details about an alien-human conspiracy that predated all our conventional views of human history. Kind of details that conspirators would stop at nothing to keep secret. For those secret societies, murder was and always has been an option. And in spite of how he uneasily came to feel like a target for the dark forces, as he referred to them. He managed to place his version of reality on the internet in the mid-1990s. It's posting kind of what we call the Branton Files, and been publicly denounced as high fantasy filled with complex and convoluted conspiracy theories. And the story is revealed by Timothy Green Beckley, CEO of Global Communications, Interlight Publications. And he published some of Branton's books, that include The Dulce Wars, Underground Alien Bases, and The Battle for Planet Earth, and The Mojave Deserts and Mysterious Secrets, both of which deal with Branton's research and the events he endured while both studying and trying to conceal himself. There's also a book called The Omega Files, Secret Nazi UFO Bases Revealed, which described how German engineers actually flew flying saucers shortly before the end of World War II. And they continued their efforts in underground bases around the world. And I've heard from many other sources they're actually underground Nazi bases in various places. Now, an obvious consequence of perhaps hiding himself from the denizens of hell and miseries, he's also largely hidden from everybody else. What little is known about Branton is not within the Mojave Desert's Mysterious Secrets. It's taken from a website that he operated in the 1990s. And according to the website, he was born in 1960 to a large family who would live near the western base of the Rocky Mountains. Grew up distrusting organized religion, which he felt had been infected by a Masonic virus, as he referred to it. And he recounted a history of being drawn into very secret neo-Masonic New Age cults, manipulated their members with mind control tactics, and even subjected young adherents to perverse rituals of molestation at the cult's deeper levels. And he admitted being infected with this spiritual poison caused him a lot of mental and emotional problems, as is usually the case with most victims of molestation. And while seeking escape from what he called legalistic forms of Christianity, only drove him deeper into the clutches of wickedness, and felt he was being used by what he called the evil one and made to do harm to others around him. But before his defection from the kingdom of darkness, as he called it, he was able to learn about many of its deeper secrets and some details of its inner workings. Came to feel it was his duty to expose this darkness to the light of truth and help others escape the traps that ruined his life. And he thought of his enemies as vampires feeding on them parasitically as he tried to overcome the effects of being abducted by aliens as a child and having the usual attendant implants inserted into his body. And I've heard that from a lot of other folks who claim to have been abducted. When I was doing my show out of California, I knew several people who claimed to have been routinely abducted. And over time, Branton came to know the ultimate culprit was a race of reptilian aliens who came from beyond and within our world, who had collected a substantial number of followers that worked through many different secret societies, including, he claims, the Masons. They say it was his faith in Christ that led him on the path to escape from Satan and his minions. Felt he discovered a more pure and truthful understanding that was different from what organized religion teaches. And he took assurances from his faith that the sins he committed while under the control of the devil would ultimately be forgiven, and he'd be allowed to warn the world at large of the dangers he discovered while in the grip of a wicked misery that had nearly killed him. Now, in the Mojave Desert's Mysterious Secrets, what little is known about Branton is laid out. According to Beckley, something was obviously going on in his head that caused this transition and led Bruce Walton to change his name to Branton. It all culminated in now transformed Branton realizing he was actually a sleeper for the CIA. According to stories that have come out, he had stumbled on some information he wasn't supposed to know. He was given an alternative personality, which was programmed to serve his CIA Black Project handlers and what he called the Bavarian Grey Collective. In this alternative or double life, he'd had access to several underground bases and over the course of time encountered several alien groups. He even said he had a number of alien implants placed at various locations in his body, not just one, as is usually the case. And while it may sound like what might be referred to as a perfect storm of conspiracy theory delusion, or even stranger claims made by Brandt, he said he was the father of a number of hybrid children conceived while he was mated with female reptilian shape-shifting aliens. He believed his hybrid children had decided to join him in resisting the New World Order. According to Beckley, if you're a fan of Branton, which if you bought the book you probably were, Branton is not for everybody. Material's got a limited appeal, and for those who take all this in and digest what he has to say, he's considered something of a savior, particularly those who contend there is a global plot to, for lack of a better term, take us over. Now, even Beckley, and I've read a lot of Beckley's material, and some of it is believable and some of it is a little way out there. And he said he hadn't heard from Brandt in years, and didn't know if anybody else has either, but when last spoken to, he'd been in a roadside accident. Riding a bike not far from his apartment, somebody collided with him and took off down the highway. And those prone to conspiracy theories claim the windows of the vehicle were tinted black and the automobile was driven by representatives of the New World Order in the form of the dreaded MIB, or Men in Black. Shortly after that, he was in trouble with the authorities and ended up in jail. And since that time, there's been nothing that came out under either Branton or his name of Bruce Walton. Now, the Branton files are posted in various shapes and forms all over the internet, and quite a lot of cleaning up in terms of spelling and punctuation before Beckley could publish some of Branton's writing in book form. Now, another item had been found on the internet was a letter Branton supposedly wrote to UK conspiracy theorist David Icke, or Icke, espouses the belief that Queen Elizabeth and a lot of other high-profile authority figures are in fact reptilian aliens disguising themselves as humans. Now, as Branton wrote, as you're probably aware, as a whole, these reptilian hybrids often lead a double life involving dual personalities, one of which is a normal life in the outer world, one that's deeply involved in the underground alien society on a nocturnal basis. Especially true what he called cocooned or hosted individuals and hybrid abductees. And Branton believed he was a hybrid. He went on to say his genealogical line intersects with that of the British royal family, and that the Mormon church serves as a cover for a lot of the old reptilian bloodlines. And he said that this may be why the Mormons prefer large families in order to breed out the normal human genetic lines, replacing the reptilian or hybrid genes. A lot of cases of Mormon hybrid abductees who suffer from multiple personality disorder, and they're under tremendous pressure from the church, especially in Utah, now to discuss their abduction experiences. And I've had a number of people tell me that they have been abducted, which may or may not be true. You have to keep in mind when you're dealing in this area, so much of what you hear is what they think you expect to hear. Now, according to Branton, underneath most major cities in the U.S. there exist subterranean counterpart cities controlled by the Masonic hybrid alien elite. Often surface or subsurface terminals exist beneath the Masonic lodges, police stations, airports, federal buildings. Some of the major population centers are deliberately established by the elite of the old and new worlds to afford easily access to already existing underground installations, some of which are thousands of years old. Now, he wrote that these sub-cities often also offer close access to organized crime syndicates that operate on the surface. They develop the science of economics through which they literally nickel and dime us into slavery through multi-level taxation, inflation, sublimation, manipulation, regulation, fines, fees, licenses, and the entire debt credit scam, which is run by the Federal Reserve and Wall Street. He said these entities not only feed on our outward society economically, but also emotionally through emotional vampirism, physically with implants, and or psychically with implants, and even bioplasmically with blood feast. They're parasites of the worst sort, vampires and leeches on the back of humanity. They control us from the cradle to the grave through their global economic and electronic control system. They'll continue to do this until enough of us on the surface join together in an international resistance and literally invade the underground systems and begin to kick ass and take names. He wrote that he saw no other way that we can once again gain our independence. Are we just going to sit around and be good little Nazi drones, or are we going to do something about it? And then Branton then commended Ike for his having joined the fight against the evil forces and says he prays for Ike's success and safety in their common struggle. Now, Branton's book, Dulce Wars, was reviewed in Fate magazine. Well, they tried to put his material into an easily digestible form. According to what was written, the alleged conspiracy primarily operates out of secret military installations like Area 51 in Nevada, as well as, according to the Dulce Wars, an underground base situated close to a tiny town in New Mexico called Dulce. I went to Dulce and I spent several days there. And while I can't say that there was an underground alien base, I can say there was a lot of odd activity going on. It would be hard to explain any other way. He wrote the secrecy surrounding the buried multi-level facility so closely guarded that that's why Branton chose the name Branton as an assumed name, because he's afraid. Now, putting aside the question of whether or not that kind of apprehension is justified, he still managed to provide an excellent overview of the many rumors and legends about Dulce, the underground facility, presenting testimony from such diverse sources as John Lear, the son of the inventor of the Learjet, Paul Benowitz, the scientist who claimed to be in contact with aliens from Dulce base through a special code on his computer, and Thomas Edwin Costello, who told Brandt he was a security officer at the Dulce base and disappeared about a year after their interview was ended. From various experts and references available, Brandt pieced together a collection of horror stories that involved, among other things, a human zoo called Nightmare Alley, where men, women, and children are housed to be used as lab rats for experiments in genetics and development of mind control techniques. Government scientists purportedly labor alongside an occupying alien force to work out the sundry ways the general population above ground can be brought under an ultimate totalitarian control, all of which began with a 1947 treaty supposedly signed by President Harry Truman. Under that treaty, the government obtained alien technological secrets in exchange for permitting the aliens to abduct human subjects for their research. Now, he wrote that the government realized too late that the aliens never intended to keep their part of the bargain, and instead perpetrated the monstrous misuse of perhaps many thousands of innocent victims, spawning along the way grotesque legends of vats filled with human body parts and animal-human hybrid creatures mindlessly howling in cages in the deeper levels of the Dulce installation. Now, I will say, while I was at Dulce, several people I've talked to told me about entrances up on the mesa to what they called an underground base. I didn't have the opportunity to explore it, but they insisted that it was there. Now, it becomes obvious why Brandt would come to dedicate his life to resisting this type of plot with its perpetrators hiding just below the surface of our planet. Hopes to convince others that danger is real and enlist their help in fighting the evil forces that might soon enslave humankind, so completely resistance will be futile and our fate sealed forever. Now, his efforts might be considered heroic, but at the same time, you have to ask, are his beliefs real? Are they even sane? Now, somewhere in this complex mix of rumor and official secrecy, there has to be a grain or two of truth. And Brandt wants you to read his material and draw your own conclusions. Now, wherever he might be now, and all all likelihood, he's still waging some kind of war against those he views as his real enemies. We continue to debate among ourselves about what conclusions we ought to be drawing. Now, along with Branton, another individual who wrote about similar things was a man named Howard Menger. When I first read Menger's material, some of it was quite believable. He talked about meeting beautiful, highly advanced beings from other planets behind his home in what was once the farming community of High Bridge, New Jersey. And when people tell you stories, you have to be listening. Does it have internal logic to the story? And his story did. Now, it could all be fantasy, but as a kid listening to people like Menger and George Adamski, you have to ask yourself, if it's fantasy, what do they have to gain from telling their stories? When Menger was interviewed by Long John Neville, he did a nightly show called Party Line, and it was on WOR radio, a clear channel, and it was basically be heard in about half the country. Now, growing up, I read anything and everything I could find on UFOs. And depending on who you talk to, the occupants of the UFOs are either the most incredibly evil entities on the planet, or they were saviors. Now, Menger talked about meeting beautiful alien women and handsome alien men. Which raises questions on so many levels. Howard and I had a brother. When his family moved to the country, they loved to wander over hill and dale, just like most kids did. I grew up on a farm. I did the same thing. Well, on a number of occasions, they had contact with strange people and strange creatures and strange tech. Now, if in fact this is all fantasy, Menger and Adamski and George Williamson had unbelievably vivid imaginations. Now, Howard Menger became more into it than his brother did. He started to venture out into the forest on his own. And he noticed he easily made friends with the smallest of creatures, such as squirrels and rabbits. And he enjoyed the sounds and the smells of nature. And he found himself drawn to a specific spot near a slow-running stream near his home. And it was one day in 1932 that would change his life forever and shape his belief patterns. He said, sitting on a rock by the brook was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. The warm sunlight caught the highlights of her long golden hair. Her body was delicately contoured, as he said, revealed through the translucent material of the clothing, similar to what skiers wear, he said. And Well, he might have had every reason to be stunned by the appearance of this woman. Seemed to have dropped out of nowhere. He said he wasn't frightened, but was overcome by a sense of what he called wonderment. And he said, Lady on the Rock looked at him. Even though he was very young, he was certainly affected. And all of his very natural anxiety suddenly disappeared. And he approached her as you would an old friend. She seemed to radiate and glow as she sat on the rock, and she didn't wear any makeup. And she spoke to him. She called him by name, said she'd come a long way to see him and talk to him. And he said as long as he lived, he'd never forget those first words. Nobody ever spoke to him like she did, and she talked with him as if he were much older. And she said she knew where he'd come from and what his purpose would be on earth. She said she and her people had observed him for a long time, and when she spoke to her people, he still couldn't understand that she was talking about people from another planet. And she stood up and she walked toward him and reached out her hands to him. He said the entire area surrounding them appeared to take on a greater kind of radiance. And she reassured him that she knew who he was and had known him for a long, long time. And he said she told him they were contacting their own, and he was one of theirs. And even though he wouldn't understand it, he would later in life. And she said it was her job to make him understand. And she said it's no fault of his that he couldn't understand everything now, but not to worry. And she talked to him like he was an adult. Well, he maintained the lady on the rock seemed to know every thought he had in his head, but at one point a look of sadness came over her face. She talked about grave changes and destruction and torment that would be taking place. She said, as you grow older, you'll learn about your purpose. You'll grow to help other people learn their purpose as well. Well, you have to wonder about the story. And he went on to talk about things there's no way he could have known about. I mean, this was 1932. Within 8 years, the beginning of World War II, and of course a lot of death and destruction. She went on to tell him that she'd see him again, but it might not be for a long time. And he said he would return to that same spot again and again, hoping to see her, but she didn't reappear. And as the months and years rolled by, that spot seemed to lose its power to attract a boy who was now approaching manhood. But he would soon learn he'd never truly be alone the rest of his life. The world out there was closing in on him, and the lady on the rock, as he called her, was only the first of a lot of strange episodes in his life involving unusual phenomena. And being a patriotic American, when he got drafted, he was happy to serve. But never wanted to be non-personable. He found he had little in common with his fellow soldiers. While they wasted no time, they wanted to shoot the breeze and play craps and drink. Menger was drawn to more esoteric activities. While on leave, he was content with window shopping, taking long walks, and watching people. And it was people watching that led to some interesting adventures and interplanetary communications. One event while south of the border, he was trying to catch a taxi when noticed there was already somebody in the cab he had hailed. The gentleman in the back seat had blonde, shoulder-length hair and was all too happy to open the door for him. Well, Menger backed off, thinking this was a little odd. And it became even more odd when Menger realized the passenger was trying to speak to him telepathically. And he thought, I might not opt to get in that cab. Later it was confirmed to him the man in the cab was one of them, as they were called. And it wasn't unusual, his earthly contact explained, for them to hang out in Mexico. They've been doing that since the time of the Aztecs. There they taught these brave young men some of the secrets they had to do with the use of sound and light necessary to produce power and run the machinery. And he went on to explain to Menger that they had been selected for a series of ongoing contacts, and while superior in many ways, these beings weren't infallible and had deep emotions just like earthlings. While they revealed in true prophetic terms that Menger's life might be in danger while in the military, they said it would never be necessary for him to have to kill another living individual. And unfortunately, this prediction, if you will, seemed inaccurate when Menger was attacked by a Japanese soldier who came at him with a bayonet, cut a hole in his tent in the middle of the night. Well, Menger fired at it. A Japanese soldier was injured by a blast of fire from Menger's service weapon, but he wasn't mortally wounded, nor his other two companions. It seemed like after that, every place Menger went, he bumped into what he called them, aliens. Widely thought aliens from space would have to be monstrous in appearance, but these folks weren't, he said. If anything, they were more delicate than we are. They were opposed to war, didn't consume meat, and believed in the sanctity of each individual, professed a love for the Creator. Looked human enough. There was something odd about their appearance, though, a little bit off, perhaps. I convinced him these visitors meant what they said when they claimed to be from other neighboring planets. Well, going back to the same area of New Jersey after the war, his contacts increased, as did the sightings of their craft. He met him in his home, as well as outdoors and several remote rendezvous spots where he'd been told to go. One was a landing field in Pennsylvania, where he'd see their craft touch down several times. On a number of occasions, he even carried a camera with him to record some of their aerial activities. And he managed to get several still photographs of the creatures approaching him against the lit-up hull of their craft, creating eerie shadows and figures that some would say were painted in because, let's face it, Menger was a sign painter, could create all sorts of effects against the right backdrops. Well, this was years before the creation of the blue screen effect, and it didn't appear Menger was sophisticated enough to create such special effects on his own. Still photographs are easy to fake. 8mm and 16mm footage are quite a bit harder back before Photoshop and the age of the computer enhancement. And there was the fact that Menger wasn't alone in reporting extraterrestrial craft and their occupants around the town of High Bridge, New Jersey. In fact, people are coming from far and wide to meet Menger, and some of them went away impressed and feeling he was a real McCoy, and others thought he was a sandwich or two short of a picnic, trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the public fascinated with space travel and UFOs. And there were others who professed to have met the space people. Some of those didn't even know Menger, and they had undergone incredible experience of their own right there where Menger lived, some of while walking about in the now famous apple orchard located behind Menger's home. Well, in 1958, Howard Menger married Connie, who still lived in Vero Beach, Florida, where they'd gone to retire. The couple ended up holding court again, as well as starting their own sign painting business once more with the assistance of their grown children. Well, he talked about a supposed trip to the moon, the invention of a dish-shaped craft that would fly out rocket fuel, the careers of radio and TV guests acting on behalf of the Space Brotherhood, and the promotion of a highly successful outdoor UFO conference, and The writing of a controversial book entitled From Outer Space to You, which created so much of a stir that he found himself backtracking away from telling about his experiences with the extraterrestrials. Well, I read that book years and years ago, and there's no doubt that he told an interesting story. Now, in addition to Menger, there was George Adamski, who said he'd met Orthon, a long-haired space visitor from Venus in a desert near Sun City, California. Adamski was known as a nice man, had a reputation for giving the best haircuts in his I'm talking about the Mystic Barber. It was another contactee back in the 50s and 60s. Then there's Stuart Robb, who talked about the prophecies of Nostradamus before anybody else started discussing them. He'd pick up voices of the dead on his tape recorder and had proof that Shakespeare didn't write any of those plays. Now, all these names initially hit the airwaves on Long John Neville's show. Now, he was finding these people. How? Is anybody's guess. Another well-known name was Gray Barker, told about Albert Bender being silenced by the Men in Black. He was a publisher. He published Menger's From Outer Space to You, and have Menger blow off the opportunity to promote the book and change his story mainstream. And there's Jim Moseley, publisher of Saucer News, later morphed into the satirical Saucer Smear. For the days he became the acknowledged court jester of ufology. And then there's Menger was, for all intents and purposes, the East Coast version of George Adamski, except that Menger's accounts were more believable than those put forth by Adamski. And there was at least some independent evidence that something unearthly was happening on Menger's property in the Garden State. And his ability to communicate a good story was heads above any of the other contactees, who mostly came from the West Coast. Menger's contacts seemed to take on a life of their own. On weekends, dozens of cars headed for the open road and wanted to pull into one of Menger's fields and talk to him personally about what had been going on while the sun went down and the heavens opened up with shooting stars and the flickering lights of flying saucers. And the stories were wild. They had no boundaries, and the public ate them up. And in his own right, he became a star with his 15 minutes of fame long before that amount of time was allocated to anybody else. Well, about the time he began to come into his own, so to speak, he grew silent. According to Gray Barker, who had issued From Outer Space to You in a deluxe hardback edition that featured an illustration on the cover that Menger had painted himself of the girl on the rock. Barker needed to recoup quite a bit of money, and like other publishers, figured the author would be more than happy to promote the work in all the media, especially on the Long John Neville show, where he could possibly sell several thousand copies. And Menger was invited on the show to hype his book. And he showed up, but his story changed from that fact to the suggestion it might all be fiction. His space friends might have been imaginary. Maybe he'd been duped by secret agents into believing it was basically a lot of hogwash. Well, Barker was beside himself, and Long John Neville didn't seem to know what to think about it either. Rumor had it Menger had been visited by the Men in Black, and it had warned him for the safety of his family he needed to basically shut up and sit down. And this doesn't seem to be out of the realm of possibility. A lot of unusual figures have been seen in the vicinity of Menger when he told his story. Some people thought they were the space people themselves, and others thought they might be the mysterious deadly men in black. Well, a number of people tried to interview Menger about his change of direction, so to speak. And Menger wouldn't talk to a lot of them. He did send some of them material that he hoped would shed some light on what was happening, why he wasn't hanging out in the limelight for the time. In addition to Menger's remarks, he wrote in his book, From Outer Space to You, which came out in 1958, he met people from outer space on his farm in High Bridge, New Jersey. Later on, while appearing on Long John Neville's show, he backed away from many of the controversial statements presented in his book. And it didn't take much to know that a lot of the stories told by the contactees over the years leave a lot to be desired in the way of evidence. Well, in 1965, Menger sent a letter to a Colonel Jordan in the U.S. Army, who was in the city clerk of Sebastian, Florida. At the time the letter was written, Menger was attempting to hold a 3-day space convention with the help of the city council in Sebastian. But because of negative publicity received from active groups such as NICAP and CSI, the council refused to give them their full support. And because of the length of the letter, in all the reading, I've seen excerpts from it, but never the full letter. According to what Menger said, when he wrote the book, For Outer Space to You, he accidentally stumbled upon a unusual situation in an isolated field on the rear of his property. And he took photographs he sent to a department in the Pentagon. And long after that, he was contacted and asked to cooperate with an experiment based on what he had inadvertently seen and project into this experience an expanded futuristic view of the things to come. In other words, this was known as the High Bridge incident. It's used as a gauge to indicate the people's reaction to alien contact. You'll think this not so strange when you consider that astronauts today are being thoroughly conditioned and trained to meet any and every strange condition or situation they may face on landing on an alien world. And the psychology of human reaction to the strange and unusual, the utter desolation of hostile terrain and the complete isolation of the black and white of space, and the feelings of looking back at a dimly glowing globe called Earth, they're feelings our astronauts have to be able to feel and conquer and control and cope with. And space medicine is dealing with unknown factors and human reactions to them. And on that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We've run out of time. We'll be talking more about Howard Menger and the High Bridge incident in tomorrow's show. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great